No good comes from doing wrong. A group of missionaries had crossed several lines. Obedience to ethical, civil and religious rules protects us in different ways and to different degrees. These missionaries had lost sight of why they were on the mission. They traded proselytizing hours for excessive fun, to the point that they got someone to lend them motorcycles and several times went for rides accompanied by girls. And I repeat, you don't get good for doing bad. On one occasion, one of the two missionaries had an accident. They had ridden their bikes along a dirt road. At first, it didn't seem like anything had happened. So his companion laughed when he saw the bike tumble. It seemed funny to him. Later, he returned to the crash site and saw his friend screaming in pain. The laughter vanished. When he tried to get him to stand, his worst fear came true. His companion wouldn't stand because he had broken several bones in his leg. Desperation and sadness overwhelmed them. They knew their days as companions were over and that they would face disciplinary councils. In seconds, sadness turned into cowardice, and in a desperate act to avoid confessing their faults, they didn't seek help from a professional doctor, not even from the mission president, who would have helped them with all love. Instead, they went to one of the local village doctors. These healers had no professional license or normal medical office or instruments. They healed through rituals that ranged from the holy and scientific to the dark and deceptive. After seeing a witch doctor, the missionary's leg astonishingly healed. The two of them went off carefree to keep living it up. Days passed and at a zone conference the mission president greeted them and noticed something different about one of them. He interviewed them together and then individually. But the weight of their guilt and the injured young man's desire to be healed led him to confess everything to the president. When he finished, the president was filled with sadness and disappointment over the thoughtless acts the two young men had committed. What he did then was give that young man a blessing of peace and comfort for what would consequently come into his life. And once the blessing ended, that young man's leg broke again. There are things you simply should not get involved with, especially things made and taught by the master of deceit. Felipe, from Los Mochis, Sinaloa, shares his experience. I served as a missionary in my youth. We were assigned for 2 years to leave our city. I was sent to Puebla, some parts of Oaxaca, some municipalities, and the mountainous part of Guerrero. This happened precisely in Guerrero, in the municipality called Tlapa de Comonfort. It's a mountainous region. On that occasion I had just received a companion who came from the United States. It was his first time in Mexico. One time we met a person walking in the town center. He told us the locality where he lived so we could visit. His house was halfway up a hill. Most of the communities around that municipality are in the mountains. We scheduled the visit and went in the afternoon. We were climbing the hill trail when we got lost at a fork in the middle of the hill. It was about 4 in the afternoon. Immediately we heard small stones rolling near us. We didn't know if someone was throwing them. We thought maybe it was something we did or a pebble shifting, so we ignored it and pressed on. We finally visited the person, talked, and it got a bit late. We wanted to get to know the area. I was new there and it was easy to meet people. On our way back, at that same fork where we had been lost, we saw a child squatting on a large rock. I guessed he was about 7 years old. He sat with his back to us but was throwing stones over his shoulder. It struck me as very strange. I went over and tried to make conversation. I greeted him and asked if he was from nearby. It was dark by then, about 7:30 p.m., but the child didn't answer. It felt odd. He still didn't turn. Moments later he did turn. He looked like a normal child, but his eyes showed a total expression of hatred, as if we had done him some great wrong. It seemed as though he had been crying. Then suddenly he started saying things in a language we didn't know. My companion couldn't understand him, not English. At first I thought he might be speaking Mixtec, since many communities there speak Mixtec. I had even heard some greetings and rude words in Mixtec before, so I knew this child wasn't using that language. With a bit of fear, we decided to ignore him and left. As we descended the hill trail, the child began throwing stones at us, and, as we hurried down, we tried to pick up the pace. We became so frightened we started to run, and the child chased after us, throwing stones and shouting angry words. We ran down the hill and reached the bottom, where there was a very humble little grocery store. We got there terrified. A woman was inside and I started to tell her, "There's a child up there. Maybe you know him, or if he's someone's son, but he's throwing stones and calling us names. He's been throwing from the crossroads up there, and we wanted to know if you know him." As soon as I began to describe him, how he looked and how he was dressed, the woman grabbed a scapular and a rosary and said simply, "If you talk about God, then start to pray." In less than 3 seconds she was on her knees. It was really strange. I was afraid the child would come down and not just throw stones but cause damage in her store. And that's what ended up happening. The child suddenly came inside. I started praying silently, asking God to help me with that child, to bless him with peace, and to relieve whatever anger he had toward us. I was praying in my mind and I looked at the woman. She was in tears, desperate and very afraid, still praying. I want to make clear that he looked like a completely normal child, except his face had that total expression of hatred. I've seen many children in my life, even my own, but I had never seen facial features in an innocent child like those. The eyes were the most terrifying thing. I've seen angry children, but never one who radiated such hatred. It felt like his gaze could cut me down. The child came closer and began to strike me. My companion fainted from the shock and the child started laughing. An absolutely horrible laugh, a laugh I don't even hear in horror movies. It was mocking, and the most terrifying part was that I could hear many voices in it. That frightened me even more. The child scratched my pants and clung to my leg, and at one moment he bit me. The bite took a very long time to heal. I had to leave the town and go to Matamoros in Puebla to be treated at a medical center because it was getting badly infected. When they asked what happened, I told them a child had bitten me, but the person who treated me said it must have been a dog and that the bacteria in the dog's mouth were strong. He didn't believe that a child had bitten me. Continuing the story, when the child bit my leg, I kicked my leg and the child flew through the air and landed near the store door. The woman stood up and began sprinkling holy water at the doorway. The child kept shouting threats, but when he saw the wet ground from the woman's water, he wouldn't come closer. After that, I revived my companion. I was afraid to leave because it was dark and we still had about 30 minutes to walk to our lodging. But we had no choice. We ran and, fortunately, we didn't encounter anything else on the way. When we got home, we knelt, prayed, and then I talked with my companion. He told me how he'd felt and what he'd thought. I was left wondering how that woman had known something bad was about to happen when I started to describe the child, since she immediately kneeled and began to pray. Maybe she had heard about it happening in that place before, or had had some experience, or someone had come to her store in the past. But beyond that, who or what was that child? I regret not asking the woman. Everyone who embarks on missionary work, once it's time to serve, must go to the missionary training center specified in their call letter. The MTC is a unique experience. Those who have been there say it's almost like Hogwarts. You learn many things in a short time, and there's so much food that many would prefer their entire mission be spent there. In 2010, a certain group of missionaries were doing exactly what you and I are doing now, telling and listening to paranormal stories. Missionaries from an entire district, shortly before lights out, were gathered in the same room, sitting in circles and sharing one by one their paranormal experiences. Finally, it was time to sleep. They prayed as a district, wishing each other sweet dreams. That same night, in the room where they'd told the stories, a series of things began to happen. The bedroom was occupied by 2 missionaries. The one on the top bunk didn't hear the stories or know what happened until the next morning. He was completely asleep. The one on the bottom, however, had a dream. He said he heard many people who, rather than babbling meaningless sounds, were articulating a language he couldn't understand. It started with one or two people speaking, and suddenly it was as if in his own mind there were hundreds of people of different ages gathered, talking, screaming and crying in various languages. He woke with his heart racing and thought the dream was due to the heavy dinner. They had eaten a lot. In addition, he could feel his bed moving. He assumed his companion was messing with him, so he got up, but his companion was sound asleep. After a while he lay down and fell asleep again. Then the bed shook inexplicably. When he woke and saw his companion still inanimate, he left the room terrified. His surprise was that these strange things didn't just happen to him. Everyone who had been telling stories had also been victims of inexplicable events. Some said they saw shadows and people at windows. Others said things slammed in their rooms. Others reported being called by their names all night long, names no one used in those places. Whatever happened to them, they believed that sharing paranormal stories attracted the attention of certain things. I used to be Mormon. Once I was transferred to an area that covered part of the San Carlos Apache Reservation in Arizona. My companion and I were given a truck because we traveled around 5 small towns of about 2,000 people each. We drove back at dusk because we had a rule not to stay in town after dark for safety. If anyone is familiar with the Superstition Highway and the turn toward Route 177, that was the area where this happened. My companion was driving. He'd been in the area 5 months and was telling me about the place and the towns. Suddenly an enormous, mangy dog walked into the middle of the road. My companion immediately accelerated. I started shouting, "What the hell are you doing? You're going to hit that dog." He just told me to shut up and not to look at the thing in the road. As we got closer, it began to look less like a dog and more like a person, but it simply sat in the middle of the road. We were doing about 100 kilometers per hour, and when we passed it I made eye contact. And I swear to God it was smiling at me. Its face was indescribable, as if someone had found a dead dog on the side of the road and was wearing its skin. I tried to turn and my companion hit my arm and shouted, "I told you not to look." It took all night to get him to tell me what it was, but he wouldn't. The next day we had a district meeting, and when I told the district leader what I'd seen, he finally explained. He talked about Native American tradition and the reservation's history, and about a legend among the natives of something called skinwalkers, someone who has acquired the ability to become any animal. What I'd seen on the road that afternoon was one of those. There was a zone conference in Guadalajara, at the stake that also housed the mission offices. It was a wonderful conference despite the bad weather. When it ended, all the missionaries left the stakes, and as is well known, the hard work fell to the secretaries. Once they had finished everything in its place, the rain let go. For those who have been missionaries, rain isn't an impediment to moving from appointment to appointment, and even less so if you're a secretary. So they got into the mission van, and on the way they found 2 unfortunate missionaries who had been unable to reach the bus stop because of the rain. They decided to give them a ride since it was late. On the way to the missionaries' house they passed a straight road lined with fields. Far off they saw something unusual. A person standing in the downpour looking up at the sky. The person was moving their arms as if applauding, raising them to shoulder height and bringing them over their head. He wore light-colored clothing and his demeanor was euphoric. When they passed him, the driver and his co-pilot looked at each other, as did the missionaries in the back. No one said anything until one of them broke the disturbing silence and asked, "Do you all feel the same?" Everyone confessed that the worst fear they had ever felt crawled through their bodies. It wasn't fear of seeing a spirit, rather it was the fear of dying, as if something sudden and violent was about to happen to them. They finally arrived at their destination without incident, but they said the fear robbed them of sleep and they had nightmares for days. In their dreams they saw their family members in the same scene, in the middle of that road in the rain, making the same gestures the man had made, with the difference that they were covered in blood. Beyond that, They said at night they felt watched and followed. Daytime made it easier to deal with the fear, but at night it was worse. The question is, what did they see, or whom were they seeing during those seconds on that rainy afternoon on that lonely road? What was it that made them feel that way for so many days? They never said.